Hey everybody, today we are doing another topic video. This week we are talking about the reverse from a couple weeks ago. Movies that you hate that everybody else loves and why you feel that way. But before I get into that, I'm going to plug my website as always. It is deepfocuslens.com. I am an artist, I do commission portraits, and I also sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Okay, Return of the King. The edits from the novel are bad choices, and the whole thing gets caught up in on its grandeur. Also, it's overly sentimental at the end. They cut Saruman and omitted the scorching of the Shire, but left 4 hours of hobbits and Gandalf laughing in the bedroom at the end. It's too long to have had these omissions, yet still revel in constant sentimental reiteration of the character's emotional journey. Yeah, I can't disagree with that. As a lot of people know who watched me very early on, when I started YouTube, gosh, maybe in like 2009, 2010, my name on here used to be Loader Lover, MR. I was a huge Lord of the Rings fan, as a lot of kids my age were back when it came out. So I went back last year and reviewed all 3 films, and it was very interesting watching them as an adult. I found myself so drawn to the first one. I thought the first one was pretty magnificent, despite its flaws. And I found The Return of the King to be the least interesting one, I think. And to be honest, I kind of felt that way initially when I was 13 seeing it. I think I was just a little swept up in the hype and all that, and I was a bit in denial, perhaps. But with perspective, absolutely agree. Everything that you say here is true, at least from my perspective. The editing, there are a lot of very bad editing choices, and I feel like Peter Jackson is too indulgent there. We certainly saw that in movies like King Kong, which came out, afterwards, a couple of years afterwards. But yeah, and I agree. It's like there are so many things that you could do when you consider the books, and yet they spent a lot of time just kind of wringing the sentimentality out, which is really sad because there's such a maturity to the first one. And I mean that very much, like it has a style of kind of like 70s movies, like, there is kind of a practical effect quality to it, even a bit of a soap opera feel to it, but it also has something very mature about it at the same time. At least I feel that way. And this film, yes, I think it just got wrapped up in the whole, oh, it's the 3rd film. Oh, the hype is so big, so we've got to give it to them in that way, in a way that did feel very much of its time. And naturally, it feels dated because of it. There are some amazing sequences in the film, absolutely. I don't mean to say it's a bad film. It's not. It's very ambitious, and it has sequences in it that I think are breathtaking. But I wish that the focus had been a little bit different. That ending is, I think, horrendous. And I thought so kind of at the time. It's just, yes, it's like, it felt like a greatest hits sort of thing. Everybody taking their final bow at the end. Very, very cringy. And when you think about a lot of the plot holes in the film, at least as far as the movie is concerned, it's like you could have filled in a lot of those blanks for us and maybe, thrown out some of the stuff that is not so necessary, especially with Saruman. In the extended version, of course, they give him his death scene, but I don't care for that scene either. I just didn't think it was very well done. But I would have liked to see that. I think a lot of people would have liked to see that, as well as the death of Grima Wormtongue. We're not privy to it, and that just feels wrong. But it happens, especially with these kind of sci-fi epics in today's world. If, a movie like this could have been made in the 40s, 50s, 60s, it would have been able to be more mature, I think. It wouldn't have had to go for all the bells and whistles in the same way. And I look at Game of Thrones in the same way. I was very worried when I first saw the show in the first few seasons that it would get so big that they would feel obligated to make it more like Lord of the Rings, which I felt was, completely in the wrong direction. But unfortunately, that's just how things tend to go nowadays. But yeah, no, Fellowship of the Ring with perspective, I think, is by far the best one. And it's just unfortunate that Return of the King, of all of them, becomes the most dated, though it's not really a surprise. I think, even at the time, you could see that happening later on. Okay, next one. Scarface. I think I more dislike how many people have come to view Tony Montana as someone to look up to because he's terrible, and Pacino, who I normally love, was way over the top. Okay, yeah, so I see what you mean there. It is kind of annoying in terms of, the way people take the mythos or whatever of Tony Montana and they glamorize it. It's a sensationalism, and we see it a lot. I remember like in the mid-2000s, we would just see a ton of like MTV Cribs episodes with rappers or whatever, and they would have, giant pictures of Scarface and Tony Soprano, as if their version of what they think the American dream is actually going to reward them in the end. It's like, it's so funny that people sensationalize them, and yet they forget what happens, what the fate of a lot of these characters tends to be, which again is very ironic. But I really liked Scarface. I reviewed it maybe a year ago, and I hadn't seen it in a long time. I watched both films, the original film and the De Palma version. I really love the De Palma version. I am a sucker for De Palma, though, admittedly. And I don't know, I like the quality of it because, yes, he comes from a certain type of postmodern viewpoint. And so everything has an artificiality to it. It feels like a rotting Technicolor world or remnants of an old world. And so, yes, part of the point of that movie is for the sensationalism to be part of it. But then also there's this kind of grotesque aspect of it. In my opinion, though, I do think that perhaps the grotesqueness of it doesn't come through in ways that maybe it does for better De Palma films. A more elevated, more mature version of kind of the postmodern aesthetic. But yes, I do think Scarface is riveting. I just don't think the humor is quite as mature, maybe, as elements of the original film from the 30s. A lot of it is more kind of thinly sketched, I think, but that's also by design. But I also do think it's not really fair to judge a movie based on the way it is received, and I understand where you come from. It does happen, like especially with toxic fan bases, or like Star Wars as an example. A movie that, is very good, and yet just the way that it has been blown out of proportion over the years, and the way it has become sensationalized, and the way that people flock to it, it can be kind of annoying. And but that's not George Lucas's fault. It's not like he foresaw what was going to happen with these movies. He did not see that it was going to change the way that movies were made, the way that movies were marketed for, the rest of time in Hollywood. That said, I do think that the way that certain people view somebody like Tony Montana is a product of the way that it is served to us. But, so I think it's kind of a mixed feeling there, but I can see what you're saying, for sure. And you're not the only one to feel that way. Dune, 2021. Having just read the book didn't help, but overall I found it kind of bland and slow, and I thought it focused on the most uninteresting aspects of the story. Also, the stuff that they choose to explain was baffling over the stuff they didn't explain. Yeah, I mean, I saw it once, and I was impressed with it, for sure, to a degree. I was impressed with, the amount of money that went into it and the scope, absolutely. It had a maturity about it. It had, really interesting composition and all of that. But yeah, it was boring. It was bland, at least from my perspective. I know a lot of people like it, though. As you say, I guess that's kind of the point of this video. But yeah, I don't know. I think it just kind of, in a weird way, and this might just be my perspective, but it felt like as I was watching it, this is very much kind of a product of our times. It's like we have these big movies, the ones that we want to put a lot of money into, and the ones that have a lot of hype behind it because it comes from a beloved book. And there's this feeling that we can't really take interesting creative risks. We have to make it more sleek and contemporary. Yes, that is Denis Villeneuve's style. But I don't know, it just felt very drained of imagination. It was a little bit too clean, a little bit too sterile for my taste. It's too expository. And with something as ambitious as a book like Dune, and just as an idea, as a story, I don't know. I think that you kind of owe it to give it some personality. That's why I unabashedly love the original Dune by David Lynch, despite how flawed it is. And I've said this so many times, I swear, but I mean, despite how flawed it is, and it is very, very flawed, it's kind of a disaster in a lot of ways. Man, it has creativity to it. Man, there are elements of it that always stick with me as stuff that never gets out of my head. Grotesque things, funny things, really spectacular things, and certain things that are very cringy or perhaps don't really fit at all. But it's more of an experience. It's more interesting, and movies were allowed to be more interesting back then because filmmakers, cult filmmakers like that, were given a platform for bigger movies like this. Today, it's maybe less the case, though I am happy that somebody like Denis Villeneuve does have a chance to make big movies because we don't see that very often. So to a degree, I'm happy about it. I just wish that we could go a little bit further. Not to say that I don't admire what he did. I mean, there are things to admire. It just didn't come together for me. And, it's all a personal taste thing. That's what's so great about this. We all have our own opinions. The 2018 Star is Born felt like a generic musical romance. Yeah, because it was. And it's really funny because that movie really touched a nerve. And I just didn't understand why. I'm a big fan of A Star is Born. I'm a huge fan of the 1950s version with Judy Garland and James Mason. I've always been a big fan of it. It is too long of a movie, and it could definitely deal with some editing and some changes here and there. But overall, I just found it to be a really devastating story. I found the relationship between Judy Garland and James Mason to be very compelling. And by the ending, yes, it is absolutely devastating. But I think a lot of that is due to the writing. And I just don't think the writing is very good here. I think Bradley Cooper is not as great as everybody is saying he is on the talk shows and is saying he is on the red carpets. They built this movie up like it was some masterpiece. And Bradley is just like, yeah, it was a labor of love and whatever. And I'm like, it's not very good in terms of writing. I don't necessarily have a problem with the direction they took it. They went more for like the Barbra Streisand version of it. And that's cool. And that certainly fits our times more. But yeah, I think I just really struggled with the relationship between Cooper and Gaga. I don't know, he's such a struggle of a person. He's so unlikable, and we're not really let into why she feels the way that she does. It's like, yes, she loves him, and there's so many times where it's like, you need to leave him, and we're not really quite understanding why she doesn't leave him. Whereas I think the dynamic between Judy and Mason, there's a lot more pathos there. It's like a lot of what they're doing makes sense more so. And also Mason is somebody that you feel bad for. It's like you want to protect him in a way. There's a gentility to him and a certain shame. Naturally, he has that kind of British shame. And I don't know, that's very appealing. Whereas Cooper is just kind of a drunk and kind of doing like a second-rate Heath Ledger performance from Brokeback Mountain, it felt like. And it is such a devastating story, really. The ending of it is harrowing, I think. And yet I couldn't believe how much I wasn't affected on this one. I was so affected in the Judy Garland version, as an example, and I felt nothing watching this version. And yeah, I don't know, the whole film just felt kind of boring, and it just felt kind of second-rate, but with a really nice budget, certainly, and nice cinematography. It's really great to have connections, isn't it? The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. It severely underplays the true horror and the sheer scale that was the Holocaust, exploiting it to use as a mere backdrop for an emotional, manipulative storyline. It's truly sickening how the film is designed to make the audience also sympathize with the Nazi family towards its ending. Not only historically inaccurate, but also shockingly insulting to the real experiences of the Jews. Completely rigid and ingenuine. Yeah, so I haven't seen this movie since it came out. I think, when was it? Like 2007 or 8, if I recall. I saw it in theaters at the time, and was pretty speechless at the end, but not for the reasons that the people I was with were speechless. I think a lot of them were just really upset by the story, and I was more upset for the reasons that you're talking about. Yeah, I don't know. It's really weird when you make, well, first of all, like with historical movies, and just with movies in general, there's always going to be kind of a manipulative aspect of it. There's always going to be an exploitive aspect of it, whether subtle or not. There just is. That's like, that's part of performance. That's part of filmmaking. It's a visual medium and such. And, there are certain movies that explore the manipulative and exploitive aspects, and then others don't. But when it comes to historical films, it's such a strange sort of thing, because it's like you want to show history as it was, maybe, depending on what kind of movie you're making. But, naturally there's going to be that aspect of manipulation to it. That's why I always find like biopics or biopics, however you want to say it, like I always find those very interesting. It's so strange. There's like this weird meta thing. It's like I'm an actor and I'm dressed up exactly like somebody who was alive. I don't know. It's just very strange. But with a movie like this, especially a subject as heavy as this, I don't know. I think you've got to tread very carefully. And yes, the Holocaust is not something you really want to, at least I don't want to see a lot of contrivance there. And and I struggle even with movies like Schindler's List, which I've been very vocal about. Beautiful filmmaking in the film at times, but there's something about it that is a little bit too sentimental and that does not quite capture the seriousness of the event. And there's a lot of historical films that I feel always have this more like objective sort of perspective, rather than really getting in there and making us feel what it would have been like at the time, not with perspective. This film very much has a perspective angle to it, I feel. Maybe not necessarily from the story. It's meant to be kind of very blind. We're seeing it from the point of view of two children. But I just mean in terms of the writing, there's something about it that just feels really off, and it just really rubs me the wrong way. And it feels like almost like the Holocaust is framework to create a sentimental angle. And not only that, I don't know, I just struggled with the performances. I struggled with the filmmaking. It just has this melodramatic angle to it. And I'm just not a fan of it. And, you know, again, it's very gray area. Like movies like Great Escape, as an example, you know, it's weird because there's something very entertaining about it and shameless about it. And yet it does feel kind of strange the way that they're depicting this historical period of time. So I think a lot of it also has to do with just your tone of it. Boy in the Striped Pajamas, though, is really going for the sentiment. It's going for some harrowing, devastating thing. It is setting you up to gut you at the end. And in a way, again, that just feels really false, really contrived. And I don't like it when movies do that to me. It's like we're smarter than that. And I don't know, I feel like the time period deserves a better depiction. That's just me. But that is the video. Thank you guys so much for submitting the responses. I always get so many for this particular question. So we'll do another one for sure in the future. But thank you guys so much for watching. Over here, you will see my patrons. Thank you guys so much for your support. If you are interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.